It was one of those perfect Saturday afternoons when everything feels right with the world. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and Rebecca had just finished her weekly grocery run. She pulled into her driveway, already thinking about putting away the ice cream before it melted. That's when she noticed the man standing near her flower beds. He was maybe in his late 40s, wearing a navy blue polo shirt tucked into khaki pants. A clipboard was tucked under his arm, and he had that official look about him that made Rebecca pause. Was something wrong with her house? "Excuse me, are you the homeowner?" the man called out, walking toward her car with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Rebecca grabbed a couple of grocery bags and stepped out. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The man extended his hand for a shake. "Name's Derek Hammond. I'm the new enforcement officer for the Homeowners Association. Just doing some routine checks in the neighborhood today." Rebecca shook his hand, though something felt off. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 3 years and had never heard of an enforcement officer position. Sure, they had an HOA, but it was pretty laid back. They mostly handled the community pool and the annual holiday decorations contest. "Oh, okay," she said, shifting the grocery bags to her other arm. "Is there a problem?" Derek clicked his pen and looked down at his clipboard with an exaggerated sigh. "I'm afraid so. Your front landscaping is in violation of Section 12.7 of the Community Guidelines. The flower beds extend 6 inches beyond the approved boundary, and the mulch color doesn't match the approved palette." Rebecca blinked. She'd carefully planted those flowers last spring, and she'd even checked the HOA guidelines online before doing it. There was nothing in there about mulch colors or specific measurements for flower beds. "I'm sorry, but I don't think that's right," she said politely. "I read through all the guidelines before I did my landscaping. There's nothing that specific in there." Derek's friendly demeanor started to crack. His jaw tightened, and he flipped through pages on his clipboard with more force than necessary. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 5 years. I know the regulations inside and out. These are updated guidelines that were just passed last month." "Last month?" Rebecca frowned. "I didn't receive any notice about updated guidelines." "Don't they have to notify homeowners about changes?" "The notice was mailed out," Derek said, his voice getting sharper. "Not my problem if you didn't check your mail. The violations stand and there's a fine attached." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "A fine? For flowers being a few inches too far?" Derek pulled out a sheet of paper from his clipboard and held it up. The letterhead said Riverside Meadows HOA at the top, which was her neighborhood, but something about it looked wrong. The font seemed off and the logo looked pixelated, like it had been printed from a low-quality image. "The fine for landscaping violations is $2,500, Derek said flatly. "It needs to be paid within 24 hours, or we'll proceed with legal action and the fine doubles." Rebecca nearly dropped her grocery bags. $2,500? For flowers? That's insane. "Those are the rules, ma'am. I don't make them, I just enforce them." Derek pulled out a small card reader from his pocket, the kind that plugs into a phone. "I can take payment right now if you'd like to settle this quickly. Cash, check, or card?" Every alarm bell in Rebecca's head was ringing now. Real HOA fines didn't work like this. They sent formal letters. There were appeal processes, and they definitely didn't send someone door to door with a card reader like some kind of traveling salesman. "I'd like to contact the HOA board before I pay anything," Rebecca said firmly, starting to move toward her front door. "Can you give me your contact information?" Derek stepped into her path. Not aggressively, but enough to make her stop walking. "Ma'am, this needs to be resolved today. I've got 16 other properties to inspect, and I can't keep coming back here." "Then I'll call them myself," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. She pulled out her phone from her purse. "I have the HOA president's number saved." That's when Derek's whole attitude changed. His face went red and he reached out and snatched the phone right out of her hand. "Hey," Rebecca shouted. "Give that back." "You're being difficult," Derek said, holding her phone away from her. "All you need to do is pay the fine." "Why are you making this so complicated?" Rebecca's heart was pounding now. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. No HOA official would grab someone's phone. She thought about screaming, but the street was empty. Most of her neighbors were at work or out running errands on a Saturday afternoon. "Give me my phone back right now, or I'm going to start yelling for help," Rebecca said, surprised at how calm her voice sounded despite the fear coursing through her. Derek glanced up and down the street nervously. Then he did something that made Rebecca's blood run cold. He shifted his weight and reached behind his back, pulling his shirt up slightly. There, tucked into his waistband, was a black handgun. He didn't pull it out all the way. He didn't point it at her, but he let her see it. Let the message sink in. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. This had become something much more dangerous. Like I said, Derek repeated, his voice low and menacing now. This is serious business. The HOA takes violations very seriously, and you need to comply. Immediately. Rebecca felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. Here she was in her own driveway in her safe neighborhood, being threatened with a gun by someone claiming to be an HOA officer. The grocery bags hung heavy in her arms. The ice cream was definitely melting now, but that was the last thing on her mind. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to think clearly. The man didn't know who she was, didn't know what she did for a living, and that might be the only advantage she had right now. Rebecca had spent 7 years as a special agent with the FBI. She'd been trained for situations exactly like this. Well, not exactly like this, because who expects to get held up in their own driveway by a fake HOA agent? But she knew how to read dangerous people. She knew how to stay calm under pressure, and she knew that the man in front of her was nervous. His hand trembled slightly. His eyes kept darting to the street, checking if anyone was watching. He was sweating despite the mild temperature. This wasn't a professional criminal. This was someone who was scared, which made him unpredictable and potentially more dangerous. Okay, Rebecca said softly, lowering her arms slowly. Okay, let me just set these groceries down and I'll get my checkbook from inside. It's in my house. Derek studied her face, trying to figure out if she was being genuine or planning something. Fine, he said finally, but I'm coming with you. And don't try anything stupid. Rebecca nodded and started walking slowly toward her front door, Derek following close behind her. Too close. She could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. As she walked, she tilted her left wrist just slightly, pressing the side button on her smartwatch 3 times in quick succession. The emergency alert was sent. Now she just had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. Her hand reached for the door handle, and she wondered if Derek realized he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because Rebecca's husband didn't work at an accounting firm like she'd told the neighbors for security reasons. He worked at the same FBI field office she did. And when an agent's emergency signal goes out, the response is immediate and overwhelming. She just needed to buy time, keep him talking. Rebecca's hand was on the door handle when Derek spoke up again, his voice tight with suspicion. Wait, leave the door open, all the way open. She nodded and pushed the door wide, letting the cool air conditioning from inside wash over them. Her mind was racing through possibilities. Her service weapon was in a biometric safe in the bedroom closet. Her phone was in Derek's pocket. But she had training, and she had something he didn't know about yet. Backup that was already on the way. The question was how long it would take them to get here. Her house was about 30 minutes from the field office, but the emergency alert would send the closest available units. That could mean 5 minutes. That could mean 20. She had to assume the worst and plan accordingly. The checkbook is in my office, Rebecca said, stepping into the entryway. It's just down the hall. Derek followed her inside, and she could feel his nervous energy radiating off him like heat. He kept one hand near the gun at his waistband. His head swiveled constantly, taking in the family photos on the walls, the lived-in comfort of their home. Was he looking for signs of wealth? Trying to figure out if she could afford a bigger fine? Nice place, he muttered. Pretty fancy for someone who can't pay a simple HOA fine. Rebecca bit back the response she wanted to give. Instead, she said, like I mentioned, I wasn't aware of any fine until today. I need to see the actual documentation from the HOA board. I showed you the documentation, Derek snapped. That paper you had looked like it was printed at home, Rebecca said carefully, still walking slowly down the hallway. She was buying time, but she was also genuinely curious. How long had he been doing this? The real HOA letters come on official letterhead with embossed seals. Derek's face flushed red again. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying I want to verify this through proper channels, Rebecca replied, keeping her voice level. That's my right as a homeowner. Your rights? Derek laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Lady, your rights are whatever I say they are right now. You see this? He patted the gun under his shirt. This means you do what I tell you. No phone calls. No verification. You pay the fine and I leave. That's how this works. Rebecca stopped at the doorway to her home office. This was a calculated risk, but she needed to understand what she was dealing with. How many people have you done this to? The question caught Derek off guard. His eyes widened slightly. What? This scam? How many people have you threatened in their own homes? For a moment, genuine anger flashed across his face. It's not a scam. The violations are real. People need to follow the rules. What rules? Rebecca pressed. The made-up rules you typed on your computer? Real HOA enforcement doesn't work like this. They don't send armed men to demand immediate payment. They don't confiscate people's phones. You know that, don't you? Derek's hand moved to the gun and Rebecca immediately regretted pushing him. His breathing had gotten faster and a vein throbbed in his temple. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice shaking now. I was a property manager for 12 years. I know more about HOA regulations than anyone. These people, they let their properties go to garbage. Someone has to maintain standards. There it was. The rationalization, the justification for whatever he was doing. Rebecca recognized the psychology. He'd convinced himself that he was doing something right, something necessary. That made him more dangerous because he believed his own story. Okay, Rebecca said softly, backing down. You're right. I'm sorry. Let me just get the checkbook. She turned into the office and Derek crowded in behind her. The room was small, with a desk against one wall covered in papers and a laptop. A bookshelf lined another wall filled with law enforcement textbooks that Derek apparently didn't look at closely enough to notice. Rebecca opened the desk drawer slowly, making sure Derek could see her hands the whole time. Inside was a checkbook, some pens, paper clips, the usual office supplies. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out the checkbook. Part of it was genuine fear, but part of it was calculated. Let him think she was just a scared suburban housewife complying with his demands. $2,500, you said? She asked, uncapping a pen. That's right, Derek said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. He thought he'd won. Make it out to Riverside Meadows HOA. Rebecca started writing, deliberately going slowly. Her handwriting was messier than usual. And your last name was Hammond? Just make it to the HOA, Derek said impatiently. I'll handle the deposit. Of course he would. The money would go straight into his personal account. Rebecca was certain of that. This wasn't his first time. The way he'd pulled out that card reader so smoothly, the prepared paperwork, the rehearsed story, he'd refined this operation. You know, Rebecca said conversationally as she wrote, I'm curious about something. Why do you carry a gun for HOA inspections? That seems unusual. Derek shifted his weight. Personal protection. You never know what kind of people you'll run into. Have you ever had to use it? Never needed to, Derek said, but there was pride in his voice. People usually cooperate once they see I'm serious. How many people? Rebecca asked again. Roughly. 20? 30? Derek's eyes narrowed. Why do you keep asking that? Just finished writing the check. Rebecca filled in the amount, $2,500. A small fortune to most people. Money this man had probably collected from dozens of victims who were too scared or confused to question him. Done, she said, signing her name at the bottom. She tore the check out carefully and held it up. Here you go. Derek reached for it, but Rebecca pulled it back slightly. Actually, can I take a picture of it for my records? You took my phone, but I have an old digital camera around here somewhere. No pictures, Derek said firmly. Just hand it over. I really need a record of this payment, Rebecca insisted. Otherwise, how do I prove I paid if the HOA comes back and says I didn't? The check itself is your record, Derek said, his patience clearly running out. Now give it to me or we're going to have a problem. Rebecca glanced at her watch as naturally as she could. How much time had passed? 4 minutes? 5? The emergency response could arrive any second. Or it could still be 15 minutes away. She had to keep stalling, but she was running out of excuses. She held out the check and Derek snatched it from her hand. He looked at it closely, checking the amount and signature. Then he pulled out his phone and that card reader attachment. For a moment, Rebecca was confused. How was he going to process a check through a card reader? But then she realized he was just taking a photo of the check. The card reader had been a prop all along, something to make his scam seem more legitimate. He'd deposit the check through his phone's banking app. Smart. No paper trail at the victim's bank. Just a check made out to an official-sounding organization. All right, Derek said, pocketing both the check and his phone. He finally pulled Rebecca's phone from his other pocket and tossed it onto the desk. "You've been cooperative, smart. Keep it that way and we won't have any problems." "Can I ask you one more thing?" Rebecca said, her voice quiet. Derek was already turning to leave, clearly eager to get out of there. "What? Did you really think you could threaten an FBI agent in her own home and just walk away?" The words hung in the air between them. Derek froze, his back still to her. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. The color had drained from his face. "What did you say?" "I'm a special agent with the FBI," Rebecca said, her voice steady and calm now. "Criminal Investigative Division. And about 4 minutes ago I sent an emergency alert to my entire unit. They're already on their way here." Derek's hand flew to the gun at his waistband. "You're lying. Am I?" Rebecca gestured to the bookshelf behind him. "Take a closer look at those books. FBI Crisis Negotiation Manual, Federal Criminal Procedure. Those aren't exactly light reading for the average homeowner." Derek's eyes flicked to the bookshelf and Rebecca saw the moment reality crashed down on him. His face went from pale to gray. The gun was in his hand now. Not pointed at her, but held loosely at his side like he'd forgotten he was holding it. "Put the gun down," Rebecca said firmly. "Right now you're looking at extortion and fraud. Don't add assaulting a federal officer to that list." "This wasn't supposed to," Derek stammered. "You were supposed to be. I watched the house. Your husband leaves at 7:30 every morning. You're alone. You were supposed to be alone." "I am alone," Rebecca said, "but I won't be for much longer. You've got maybe 2 minutes to make the smartest decision of your life. Put the gun down, get on the ground, and we can end this without anyone getting hurt." Derek looked at the gun in his hand like he was seeing it for the first time. His whole body was shaking now. "I can't go to prison. I can't. Do you know what they do to people like me in there?" "Then don't make this worse," Rebecca urged. "Please, just put it down." For a long, terrible moment, Derek just stood there, trapped between fight and flight instincts. Rebecca could see him working through his options, none of them good. His eyes darted to the window, to the door, to Rebecca, back to the gun. And then from outside came the sound Rebecca had been waiting for. The high-pitched squeal of tires taking a turn too fast. The deep rumble of heavy vehicles moving at speed. Derek heard it too. The sound of vehicles screeching to a halt outside was like music to Rebecca's ears, but she didn't let herself relax. Not yet. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation is when a cornered person realizes they're out of options. Derek's face had gone from gray to white. The gun in his hand was shaking so badly Rebecca worried it might go off by accident. Through the office window, she could see the distinctive black SUVs of the FBI Tactical Response Team, 2 of them, parked at aggressive angles across her front lawn. "Put it down," Rebecca said again, her voice harder now. "Right now, Derek, this is your last chance," but Derek wasn't listening anymore. He was backing toward the window, the gun swinging wildly between Rebecca and the door. "This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't. I just needed the money. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. And nobody will get hurt if you just put the gun down," Rebecca said, taking a small step forward with her hands raised and visible. "Look at me, Derek, I'm fine. You haven't hurt anyone. We can still walk away from this." Outside, she heard the distinctive sound of car doors opening, heavy boots hitting pavement. The tactical team was deploying. Any second now they'd be at her door. FBI. "Open the door!" The command came from right outside, loud and authoritative. Derek spun toward the sound, and that's when Rebecca saw her opportunity. His back was partially to her, his attention divided, his grip on the weapon loose from panic and fear. 7 years of training kicked in like muscle memory. Rebecca stepped forward quickly, her right hand shooting out to grab Derek's wrist while her left arm came around to control his elbow. She twisted hard, using his own momentum against him, the textbook disarm technique she'd practiced hundreds of times in training. Derek yelped in surprise and pain. The gun clattered to the hardwood floor and Rebecca kicked it away, while simultaneously sweeping Derek's legs out from under him. He went down hard, face first, and Rebecca was on him in a second, her knee pressed into his back, his arm twisted up at an angle that made any resistance agonizing. "Stay down," she commanded. "Don't move." The front door exploded inward with a crash. The tactical team poured in, weapons raised, moving with the practiced precision of professionals who'd done this 1,000 times. "Clear," someone shouted from the living room. "Clear," came another voice from the kitchen. In here, Rebecca called out. Suspect is contained. Weapon is secured. 3 agents in full tactical gear appeared in the office doorway, rifles raised but immediately lowering them when they saw the situation was under control. The lead agent was Chris Martinez, a 15-year veteran Rebecca had worked with on dozens of cases. You okay, Becca? Chris asked, already moving forward with zip-tie restraints. I'm fine, Rebecca said, though her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was starting to wear off. He's armed with a handgun. I kicked it under the desk. Chris took over restraining Derek while another agent carefully retrieved the weapon. Rebecca stood up, her legs suddenly feeling like rubber. She leaned against the desk, taking deep breaths. Suspect secured, Chris said into his radio. Agent Rodriguez is safe. Bringing him out now. They hauled Derek to his feet and Rebecca got her first good look at him now that the immediate danger had passed. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. Tears were running down his face and he was mumbling something that sounded like, I'm sorry, over and over again. You have the right to remain silent, Chris began, reciting the Miranda warning as they led Derek out of the office. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Rebecca followed them out into her living room, which had been transformed into a tactical operations scene. Agents were everywhere, securing the area, documenting everything with cameras. Through the open front door, she could see neighbors gathering on the sidewalk, phones out filming the spectacle. Another SUV pulled up, and Rebecca's heart leapt when she saw her husband Michael jump out. He wasn't in tactical gear. He'd clearly just rushed straight from the office. His tie was loose, his shirt partially untucked, and his face was pale with worry. Rebecca. He ran up the lawn, badging past the perimeter agent. Are you okay? What happened? Rebecca found herself pulled into a tight hug, and suddenly all the fear she'd been holding back came flooding out. Her whole body started shaking. I'm okay. I'm okay. It was just... He had a gun, Mike. He pulled a gun on me in our driveway. Who is he? Michael asked, pulling back to look at her face. His eyes were scanning her for injuries. Did he hurt you? I'm fine physically, Rebecca assured him. He's a con artist, fake HOA agent. He's been scamming people all over the county, threatening them with a gun until they pay fake fines. Chris approached them, Derek now secured in the back of one of the SUVs. We need to get your statement, Becca, and we found some interesting stuff in his car. They walked outside together, Rebecca still holding onto Michael's hand. Derek's vehicle, a silver Honda Accord, was parked 3 houses down. The trunk was open and agents were photographing and cataloging its contents. Take a look at this, Chris said, gesturing to the trunk. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. A laptop computer sat in a carrying case surrounded by dozens of manila folders. There were printing supplies, blank check templates, and several different polo shirts with fake company logos embroidered on them. But what really caught Rebecca's attention was a yellow legal pad covered in handwritten notes. One of the agents, wearing gloves, held up the pad so Rebecca could see it without contaminating evidence. It was a list. Addresses, dates, and dollar amounts. She counted quickly, at least 40 different entries. Maybe more. Looks like you weren't his first victim, Chris said grimly. Not by a long shot. Rebecca felt sick to her stomach. All these people. He threatened all of them. We'll need to contact each one and get statements, Chris said. But yeah, looks like he's been running this operation for months, maybe longer. Michael squeezed Rebecca's hand. You stopped him. No one else has to go through what you did. But Rebecca was thinking about all those addresses on that list. 40 families who'd been terrified in their own homes. People who'd handed over thousands of dollars because they were scared and confused. How many of them even reported it? How many just paid and tried to forget it happened? Agent Rodriguez? A younger agent approached with an evidence bag. Inside was Rebecca's check, the one she'd written for $2,500. We found this in his pocket. Did you actually give him a check? I was buying time, Rebecca explained, keeping him calm until backup arrived. I'll just put a stop payment on it. Smart thinking, Chris said. Your body cam footage is going to be crucial evidence too. Rebecca touched her watch. I activated it with the emergency alert. It should have captured everything from the moment I pressed the button. Everything he said, everything he did on camera, Michael said with satisfaction. That's what we call an airtight case. The next hour was a blur of statements, evidence collection, and paperwork. The neighbors had to be reassured that everything was safe. The tactical team had to pack up their equipment. News vans started arriving, having picked up the chatter on police scanners about an FBI operation in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Through it all, Derek sat in the back of the SUV, staring at nothing. Rebecca found herself looking at him at one point, trying to understand what drove someone to do something like this. He'd been a property manager, he'd said. What had happened to turn him into someone who threatened innocent people in their homes? One of the forensic analysts approached with the laptop from Derek's car. "Agent Rodriguez, you're going to want to see this." They'd opened up the laptop, and on the screen was a document that made Rebecca's blood boil. It was a template for fake HOA violation notices, complete with official-looking letterheads for at least 6 different neighborhoods. There were form letters, fake signature stamps, even a spreadsheet tracking which violations worked best for extracting money. "He's been running a whole operation," the analyst said. "Different neighborhoods, different fake identities. He's got polo shirts in the trunk with different company names on them. He'd research the HOA boards, figure out which neighborhoods had loose communication with homeowners, and exploit the gaps." "Unbelievable," Michael muttered. "How much money did he steal?" The analyst pulled up the spreadsheet. The numbers were staggering. Based on what's documented here, over $170,000 in the past 8 months alone. Rebecca felt dizzy. $170,000. That was life-changing money for most people. College funds wiped out, retirement savings drained, all because people were scared and didn't know what to do when a man with a gun showed up at their door, claiming they owed money. "We need to contact every single victim on that list," Rebecca said firmly. "They deserve to know they were scammed, and they deserve to get their money back if possible. We'll freeze his accounts immediately," Chris assured her. "Whatever we can recover will go to victim restitution." As the sun started to set, the scene finally began to wind down. The evidence was loaded into vehicles. Derek was transported to the federal building for processing. The neighbors slowly drifted back to their houses, no doubt with incredible stories to tell at dinner. Rebecca and Michael stood in their driveway. Monday morning came too soon for Rebecca. She'd spent most of Sunday dealing with insurance claims for the door, talking to concerned neighbors, and trying to process everything that had happened. Now she was sitting in an interrogation room at the FBI field office, watching Derek through the two-way mirror. He looked even smaller than he had on Saturday. Stripped of his fake authority and sitting in an orange jumpsuit, Derek was just a scared middle-aged man who'd made terrible choices. But Rebecca couldn't let herself feel too sorry for him. Not when she thought about all the people he'd victimized. Michael stood beside her, a file folder in his hand. His real name is Derek Paulson, 47 years old, lived in the area his whole life. And you're going to love this, he really was a property manager. "Was?" Rebecca asked. "Got fired 2 years ago from a company called Summit Properties. They caught him skimming money from maintenance funds, small amounts at first, then bigger ones. By the time they figured it out and did an audit, he'd stolen about $30,000 over 18 months. Rebecca shook her head. So he went from stealing from his employer to stealing from homeowners. Real career progression. It gets better, Michael continued, flipping through the file. He never actually faced charges for the Summit thing. They were a small company, didn't want the publicity or the expense of prosecution. They just fired him and tried to keep it quiet. "Let me guess," Rebecca said. "That emboldened him. Made him think he could get away with bigger crimes." "Exactly. Based on what we found on his laptop and the dates in his records, he started this HOA scam about 6 months after getting fired. Probably after his unemployment ran out and he couldn't find legitimate work." Through the mirror, Derek was slumped in his chair, staring at the table. His lawyer, a young public defender who looked fresh out of law school, sat beside him looking over documents. The door to the observation room opened, and Chris Martinez walked in carrying a coffee and an even thicker file folder. "Morning. You ready for this? What did you find?" Rebecca asked. Chris set down his coffee and opened the folder, pulling out page after page of printed spreadsheets. "We went through everything on his laptop and his phone records." This guy was meticulous. He kept records of everything, every victim, every payment, every detail. "That's good for prosecution," Michael noted. "It's great for prosecution," Chris agreed, "but it's also heartbreaking. Look at this." He laid out several pages with victim profiles. Derek hadn't just written down addresses and amounts. He'd kept notes about each person, their schedules when they were home alone, whether they had dogs, what kind of cars they drove. He'd even noted which victims seemed nervous or compliant. He was profiling them, Rebecca said, feeling sick, looking for the most vulnerable targets. Exactly, Chris said. Single women, elderly homeowners, people who worked from home and wouldn't have many witnesses around. He watched these houses, sometimes for days, before making his approach. Rebecca thought about Saturday afternoon, the way Derek had said he'd watched her house, knew when Michael left for work. The planning that had gone into it made it feel even more violating. How many victims total? She asked. 34 confirmed from his records, but there might be more who paid cash and he didn't document. We're canvassing the neighborhoods on his target list to see if anyone else had similar experiences. Michael whistled low. 34 families. That's a lot of trauma. We've started contacting them, Chris said. That's actually the hardest part of this case. A lot of them had no idea they'd been scammed. They thought they'd paid legitimate HOA fines. How do they react when you tell them? Rebecca asked. Chris rubbed his face tiredly. It varies. Some are angry. Some are embarrassed. A couple people refused to believe it at first. And a few— He paused, his expression darkening. A few had been so traumatized by the encounter that they're actually relieved to know they weren't crazy for being scared. Rebecca felt her anger toward Derek intensify. Did anyone else have a gun pulled on them? At least 8 victims mentioned seeing a gun. He didn't always show it, but he made sure enough people saw it to know he was carrying. Classic intimidation tactic. The door to the interrogation room opened, and Agent Lisa Chen, one of the Bureau's best interrogators, walked in. Through the mirror, they watched her sit down across from Derek and his lawyer. Mr. Paulson, Lisa began, her voice professional but not unkind. I'm Agent Chen. I need to ask you some questions about Saturday's incident and about other related activities. Derek's lawyer immediately spoke up. My client is willing to cooperate, but we'd like to discuss a possible plea agreement before— Let's start with the basics, Lisa interrupted smoothly. Mr. Paulson, how long have you been posing as an HOA enforcement officer? Derek looked at his lawyer, who nodded. About 8 months, he said quietly. Maybe 9. And how many properties have you visited in that capacity? I'm not sure exactly. Lisa pulled out a printout of the spreadsheet from Derek's laptop and slid it across the table. We found this on your computer. It lists 43 addresses. Is this accurate? Derek stared at the paper, his face crumbling. I kept records because I wanted to make sure I didn't hit the same neighborhoods too frequently. I didn't want people comparing notes. So you knew what you were doing was wrong, Lisa said. It wasn't wrong, Derek said, and there was a flash of the defensive anger Rebecca had seen in her office. These people were violating HOA standards. Someone had to enforce them. His lawyer touched his arm, but Derek kept talking. You don't understand what it's like. I spent 12 years as a property manager. 12 years watching properties fall apart because owners don't care. Lawns turning into jungles, paint peeling off houses, trash piling up. It destroys property values for everyone. Someone has to maintain standards. By threatening people with a gun? Lisa asked calmly. I never threatened anyone, Derek insisted. I needed them to take it seriously. The gun was for protection. I never pointed it at anyone, never. In the observation room, Rebecca scoffed. He pulled it on me. You can prove that with the body cam footage, Michael reminded her. He's lying to make himself look better. Lisa was continuing the interview. Mr. Paulson, how much money did you collect in these fines? Derek looked down at his hands. I don't know exactly. Your spreadsheet lists specific amounts for each address. The total comes to $173,000. Does that sound accurate? The number hung in the air. Even Derek's lawyer looked shocked. It wasn't about the money, Derek said weakly. It was about maintaining standards. If it wasn't about the money, what did you spend it on? Lisa asked. Derek didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, I had expenses. Rent, car payment, food. I couldn't find work after my last job ended. After you were fired for embezzlement, Lisa clarified, pulling out another document. You stole $30,000 from Summit Properties over an 18-month period. Is that correct? That was different, Derek protested. They were overcharging clients and not maintaining properties properly. I was just redistributing resources. In the observation room, Chris shook his head in disgust. This guy has justified every crime he's ever committed. He actually believes his own rationalizations. The interrogation continued for another hour. Lisa methodically went through each victim on the list, asking Derek to confirm details. Sometimes he remembered them clearly, describing the properties and the violations he'd cited. Other times he seemed fuzzy on details, which worried Rebecca. If he doesn't remember some of them clearly, there might be even more victims, she said. We're working on that, Chris assured her. We've put out notices to all the HOA communities in the county, asking people to report any suspicious contacts. We're also checking his phone GPS records to see what other neighborhoods he visited. Around noon, Lisa took a break from the interrogation. She joined them in the observation room looking frustrated. He's delusional, she said bluntly. He's created this entire narrative where he's some kind of community guardian maintaining property standards. He genuinely doesn't seem to understand that scamming people out of their money at gunpoint is a crime. What about the victims who were too scared to fight back? Rebecca asked. Does he show any remorse for traumatizing people? Lisa shook her head. He keeps saying he was never aggressive, that people just got upset because they didn't want to follow the rules. He doesn't see their fear as legitimate. What's his lawyer saying about a plea? Michael asked. They want to avoid trial, obviously. The evidence is overwhelming. They're hoping for a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation and providing a full accounting of all victims. Rebecca thought about the woman whose address was first on Derek's list, a single mom named Patricia, who'd paid $3,000 while her 2 kids watched from the window. Derek had noted in his spreadsheet that she'd been very cooperative, cried during payment. I don't want him getting a light sentence, Rebecca said firmly. He terrorized dozens of people. He pulled a gun on a federal agent. He needs to face real consequences. Agreed, Chris said. But a plea deal means the victims don't have to testify. Some of them really don't want to relive this experience in court. That was 3 months later. Rebecca stood in front of a classroom at the FBI Academy in Quantico. A PowerPoint slide projected behind her showing a photo of Derek Paulson's spreadsheet. 24 trainees sat before her, taking notes as she walked them through the case that had started in her own driveway. The key thing to understand about predators like this, Rebecca was saying, is that they don't see themselves as criminals. Paulson genuinely believed he was providing a service, enforcing standards that lazy homeowners were ignoring. That delusion made him dangerous because he felt justified using intimidation and weapons to get compliance. A hand went up in the back row. Agent Rodriguez, when did you realize he was targeting you specifically as a vulnerable victim? Rebecca clicked to the next slide, showing excerpts from Derek's notes. He'd been watching my house for 3 days before he approached. He noted that my husband left for work at 7:30 each morning, and that I usually did my grocery shopping on Saturday afternoons. He literally wrote, "Target appears to be alone most weekdays, should be compliant." He profiled me as someone who'd be easy to intimidate. There was a ripple of uncomfortable laughter through the classroom. The trainees knew how wrong Derek had been about that assessment. What he didn't know, Rebecca continued, is that you can't judge someone's capabilities by their appearance or their daily routine. The scared suburban housewife he thought he was targeting turned out to be a federal agent with 7 years of tactical training. That's a lesson that applies to all of us. Never underestimate the person across from you. The lecture went on for another 40 minutes, covering everything from recognizing con artist behaviors to properly documenting evidence to the psychology of financial scams. When it ended, several trainees clustered around Rebecca with additional questions. "Do you think you were ever in real danger?" one young woman asked. "Or was he too scared to actually use the gun?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I think in that moment he was capable of anything. Cornered people are unpredictable. I didn't assume I was safe just because I had training. I treated him like any armed suspect, with caution and respect for the potential threat." After the trainees filed out, Rebecca packed up her materials and headed back to her office. The case against Derek Paulson was closed now. He'd taken the plea deal, been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and been transferred to a medium security facility in Pennsylvania. But the ripple effects of his crimes were still unfolding. Back at her desk, Rebecca opened her email to find several messages from the victim services coordinator. They'd managed to contact 34 confirmed victims, and another 7 people had come forward after news coverage of the case. 41 families total, all with similar stories of intimidation and fear. The recovered money, $47,000 from Derek's accounts plus another $12,000 from selling his car, and other assets, had been divided among the victims. It wasn't much, maybe $1,500 each on average. For some people, that recouped most of what they'd lost. For others who'd paid larger amounts, it was just a fraction. But money wasn't really the point. Rebecca had learned that from talking to several of the victims personally. One of them, Patricia Chen, had sent Rebecca a handwritten letter that she kept in her desk drawer. Patricia was the single mom who'd been Derek's first victim, the one who'd paid $3,000 while her kids watched from the window. "Thank you for catching him," the letter read. "Not just for the money, though, that helps. Thank you for making me feel less stupid. I spent 8 months thinking I was an idiot for falling for his scam, for being too scared to question him. Now I know I wasn't alone. Now I know it wasn't my fault. That means more than you can imagine." Rebecca had called Patricia after receiving the letter. They'd talked for almost an hour. Patricia shared how she'd been terrified for weeks after paying Derek, worried he'd come back and demand more money. She'd avoided being home alone, started parking in her garage instead of the driveway, and had even considered moving to a different neighborhood. "I felt so powerless," Patricia had told her, "like my own home wasn't safe anymore, and I couldn't tell anyone because I felt so ashamed." That shame was something Rebecca heard repeatedly from victims. They felt foolish for being tricked, embarrassed that they'd been scared, guilty that they hadn't fought back. It was one of the reasons crimes like Derek's went unreported so often. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Heading home early. Door guy is coming at 4 to install the new one. Want me to pick up dinner?" She smiled and texted back a yes. The new front door had become a running joke between them. They'd upgraded to a reinforced security door with a smart lock and a video doorbell. Michael called it their fortress door. Their neighbors probably thought they were paranoid, but after what happened, Rebecca wasn't taking chances. Before leaving the office, Rebecca checked her personal email and found a message from the local news station. They wanted to do a follow-up story on the case and its impact on community safety. Several HOA boards had reached out asking for advice on protecting their residents from similar scams. That gave Rebecca an idea. She spent the next hour drafting a proposal for a community awareness program. Working with local HOA boards, she could help educate homeowners about common scams, how to verify official contacts, and what to do if they felt threatened. The FBI had resources for this kind of community outreach, and this case had proven how necessary it was. She sent the proposal to her supervisor and shut down her computer. On the drive home, Rebecca found herself thinking about Derek again. Not with anger anymore, but with something closer to pity. He'd destroyed his own life and traumatized dozens of people, all while convincing himself he was doing the right thing. How did someone end up like that? Was it the embezzlement that started it? Or had there been warning signs earlier? Had anyone tried to help him when he lost his job? Or had he spiraled alone into desperation and rationalization? Rebecca would never know the answers to those questions, but she could help prevent the next Derek Paulson from victimizing innocent people. When she pulled into her driveway, she took a moment to look at her flower beds. They'd recovered nicely from being trampled during the FBI response. The tulips were in full bloom now, bright red and yellow against the dark mulch. They were absolutely beautiful, and there wasn't a single thing wrong with them. Michael was already home, and through the window she could see him in the kitchen, probably starting dinner. Their new door, the fortress door, was already installed, gleaming and solid. A red bow was tied around the handle, Michael's sense of humor showing through. As Rebecca walked up to the house, her phone rang. It was Chris Martinez. "Hey, Becca, got some news you'll want to hear. Remember how we put out those notices asking people to report suspicious HOA contacts? Yeah, we got a hit in Virginia. Different MO, but similar pattern. Guy posing as a code enforcement officer, demanding immediate payments for violations. Local PD didn't know what to make of it until they saw our alert about Paulson's case." Rebecca felt her heart sink. Another one. "Are they charging him?" "They're building a case now. But here's the thing. The victim who reported it said she'd heard about your case on the news, said it gave her the courage to come forward instead of just paying and staying quiet." "That's good," Rebecca said, meaning it. "That's really good. There's more, Chris continued. The Bureau wants to create a task force specifically targeting these kinds of neighborhood-based scams. Financial Crimes is putting together a team, and they want you on it. Interested? Rebecca looked at her flowers, her fortress door, the home she'd defended. She thought about Patricia and the other 40 victims who'd suffered in silence. She thought about the woman in Virginia who'd had the courage to report because she'd heard Rebecca's story. Yeah, she said. I'm interested. Excellent. First meeting is next Tuesday. I'll send you the details. After hanging up, Rebecca went inside and found Michael in the kitchen pulling a casserole out of the oven. You look happy, he observed. Good day? The Bureau wants to create a task force for neighborhood scams, Rebecca said, stealing a piece of garlic bread from the counter. They want me on the team, Michael grinned. Of course they do. You're the agent who took down a fake HOA officer in her own home. You're basically a legend now. I don't know about legend, Rebecca protested, but she was smiling. I just did my job. You did more than your job. You're helping a lot of people get justice and closure. That matters, he was right. It did matter. Every victim they'd contacted, every dollar they'd recovered, every person who felt safe enough to come forward, it all mattered. Over dinner, Michael told her about his day while Rebecca half listened and half planned the community awareness program in her head. They could do workshops at community centers, create informational materials for HOA boards, maybe even get local police departments involved. Earth to Rebecca, Michael said, waving a hand in front of her face. You're doing the thing where you mentally solve problems while pretending to listen to me. Sorry, Rebecca laughed. I'm just excited about this task force. There's so much we could do. I know that look, Michael said. You're going to change the world one